Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second in a series of conversations where I am speaking with people about the experience of being unemployed. And I'm excited to have Ian Slater joining me today. Ian is a colleague of mine from Student Affairs, and he and I first connected a couple of years ago on LinkedIn. And I've always appreciated the thoughtfulness in your posts that you make, and just it feels like just this genuine passion for working with students, working with your staff in higher ed. And they say, things, what are they, blessings in disguise. I guess one blessing in disguise of our situation is I've had the chance to actually meet you now. I mean,
Share
before
trauma, share
virtual
trauma.
meeting, but other than
Yeah.
just posts on LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
so thank you for joining me today, Ian, and welcome.
Thank you, Melinda. Yeah, glad to be here, and sad that hard situations have united us further, but always good to connect with you and spend time together.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, for starters, I just wanted to start off and obviously, I invited you because you are dealing with the loss of a job, and I just wanted to start by asking you to tell your story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, friends, higher ed is crazy, right? And Melinda, you've lived this, and there's so much beauty, and yet it's choppy waters these days. And so, as we've talked about on the side, the journey is not always linear. It's not always what we expect or want it to be. I think I shared with you. I've been a reluctant free agent now on 3 occasions in the last 5 years. And if that's not some sort of signal about higher ed today, I don't know what is, right? So my first was at a great situation university out in the Midwest, and during COVID. During COVID, a lot of things were stressed and strained, and we were trying to figure out structures and what made sense for organizations. And partway through that first phase, that first few months of COVID, we made some shifts, and I found myself as a reluctant free agent. And so, navigating really all that came with, and that was for my first time. That was my first sort of major, I'll call setback or disruption, probably is a better word, in the career direction. I was a freshly christened PhD with a passion for students and rising in the organization and being a part of some really beautiful work with our team. And I was suddenly, unemployed, and I was a stay-at-home dad with, little ones, and changing diapers and going to playgrounds and maintaining 6 feet of separation from everybody. And I just remember like how disorienting that piece was. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But my first job loss was around COVID, and the ways that it sort of prompted and forced me into some identity questions was really significant. And then I had an opportunity to join an amazing little place out in the Boston area, and that's around the time that you and I met. And in that journey, I knew I was signing on for a pretty challenged situation and wanted to be a part of almost like a rescue mission. Can we help a distressed institution turn around and make it? It was doing some great work that was needed. Can we help it survive and turn this around? And that ended in a college closure, as we see happening elsewhere. And so that's a whole different kind of grief, right? That's not just like what's going to come of Ian's little career, but it was a journey of watching a whole community in absolute grief, figuring out, that their jobs, their homes, their not insurance, the care for their community, their sense of identity and belonging and purpose had all been simultaneously shattered, employees and students alike. So we went through that season, right? And then just recently, I have been a part of a great little college out in Western New York, and they're going through some restructures and some layoffs, and budget pictures as they are. Here I am again, navigating those same questions. And so in some ways, I feel like my story, I could go through other moments that weren't as painful, of course, but in these junctions, I felt very much, very much the hard parts of this, but also to try to navigate through it, and like we've been talking about.
And it's interesting because when we first connected about this, I didn't realize that you've had 3 times where you've had your job lost and for
Yeah.
different reasons. It feels like anything that could come up has come
Right,
up. And
right.
I guess, like, just how do you keep going? Because I know for me, like, this being a single incident has felt pretty overwhelming. I mean, what keeps
Right.
you going and just coming back to higher ed and just saying, okay, I'm going to do this again?
Yeah, man, that I ask myself that question too sometimes.
Yeah.
It's hard, right? Like you love something so deeply, and frankly, people who join higher education are often doing it out of a deep sense of purpose, right? A love
Yeah.
of student, a love of the formative journey, a belief that what we're doing matters in the world around us, that we're enhancing society, we're improving the workforce, and we're attending to people in this formative moment, right? And so it feels sort of acutely shattering when we have this kind of transition, because like who are we outside of this purposeful, life-giving, missional work? Who are we? And I've honestly, man, I've found a lot of my center, a lot of my reason for loving higher ed, even though it doesn't always love me back,
Mhm.
um, around that very same purpose. Like we have students who are trying to figure out the big questions, and I'll tell you, I love those moments. I love the relationships. I love being a part of the infrastructure. Whether someone's like a trio advisor who's got their caseload that they're working with
Mhm.
closely and helping these students achieve their educational dreams, or you're in accounts payable and you're helping the overall infrastructure of an organization. What we're doing is so purposeful, and
Mhm.
that both is part of what makes the grief so acute and painful and personal to lose that, but it's also what keeps me wanting to come back, right?
Mhm.
It's beautiful communities, it's beautiful work. um I mean, it's what have kept us not just in
Yeah.
higher ed, but even in student affairs, because of how we get to see firsthand the impact of these missions and these organizations on students and their families and their communities and employers. Um, so at a broad level, I think that's probably it.
Mhm.
And I should also acknowledge, like I've had those times when I've had to wrestle with, is it my time to step out
Yeah.
of the industry? It's hard to love right now. It's challenged. It's chaotic. There's pressures everywhere. But every time I go to those places, I find myself almost talking myself back from the ledge to say, I don't
Mhm.
want to leave.
Yeah.
Maybe I have to be more imaginative in how I'm supporting higher ed.
Mhm.
And maybe I'm going to enter my next gig with that deeper tenderness from the journeys that have come before. But I think it's still worth loving deeply. And our
Mhm.
students are still worth supporting and championing and cheering for.
And it's interesting as you talk about that because I myself have thought that in the past month or so, like, is higher ed really where, like, I'm going to continue being, or should I
Mm,
consider looking outside the box and looking at
mhm.
different career options? But I do feel like even in the past week, like, I've had this sort of recommitment mentally to higher
Yeah.
ed. And I think there's something about when you were describing about sort of the idea of meaning and purpose and um, what brings you joy in your work. I mean, that's always something we talk to students about, as
Right,
students
right.
enter college, like, what brings you meaning? Where's your purpose? What brings you
Yeah.
joy? And we're living that too. And
Right.
I think this is a good example of it. That sometimes um, it's it's hard, and sometimes what's bringing us joy
Mhm.
at the moment isn't giving us joy, but it doesn't mean
Right,
that
right, right.
that's not our path. And so
Right.
I guess that speaks to the persistence of pursuing your passion, even though sometimes that passion results in you feeling knocked down and
Yeah.
that you have to pick yourself back up and regroup
Yep.
and keep
Yep.
going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that reference to also how we support our students, right? Because especially in the student affairs space, we're having these deep,
Mhm.
and enrollment counselors do this too, and others, but you're having these deep conversations about who do you want to be and
Yeah.
how do you step into that faithfully, and how do you, how are you going to have an impact in this world? And so we
Mhm.
do that with our students. And the
Yeah.
number of times I think, especially in these disorienting and frankly disconcerting moments of
Mhm.
transition, the number of times I hold the mirror up to myself as if I'm like talking to myself from like, Dr. Slater, what should I do? I'm in
Yeah.
this difficult situation. Well, young man, you should, and you start having that dialogue again,
Yeah.
thinking this is the exact same principles that we talk with our students about all the time. How
Mhm.
can I apply them to this moment? Um,
Yeah.
that's harrowing. It's humbling, right? To have to take my own advice in a moment like this. But
Yeah.
it recenters us on what is it that we're here for? What is it we love? What is it that we've dedicated ourselves
Yeah.
to for years, and how do we help sustain that?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about just your story, one thing I want to loop back on is that you were at an institution that closed. And
Mhm.
I was reading an article, and I wish off the top of my head I could remember which publication it was in, but they have sort of a tracker of colleges who closed or who have merged
Mhm.
with another institution or been acquired by that.
Yeah.
And it dates back to 2016. And in that category, there were 129 institutions that have either
Mhm.
closed or merged or whatnot. And that is just, that's so many
Mhm.
colleges and universities who have basically closed their doors,
Yeah.
and their students don't have that place that they thought they were going to graduate from, or the alumni don't have that alma mater
Right.
physically to go to anymore. And then employees are left, having to figure
Yeah.
out the next
Yeah.
move and grieving all that. And I know even now there are schools in really big trouble in terms of maybe having to close. So I guess if you're thinking of maybe someone in that position where their school just recently closed, or they're in a position where there's a good chance that they could be
Mhm.
facing this soon. I mean, is there anything that, I don't know if it's words of wisdom or just anything from your experience that could provide a helpful lens to this?
Yeah. No, that's a harrowing reality, right? Especially in
Mhm.
an industry that I think we all thought maybe coming into it, we're like, oh, it's stable, it's higher education.
It's safe, safe
These
bet.
colleges, yeah, they've been here since 1850 or whatever. Like, this is great. Honestly, it is a hard moment, and I think even the institutions that might provide more stable, kind of forward facing, presentations of their stability and their financial health. You talk to the presidents, and they're far, far, far more worried, and they're feeling the concern, the public, the decline of the public narrative, the pressures of state and federal governments, the culture kind of charge that's around us right now, and how to navigate these climate moments,
Yeah.
and the enrollment cliffs, and the financial pressures, and the expanding costs of providing health benefits to employees.
Mhm.
And so you stack all that in, and it's a
Yeah.
hard moment. And I think there's that old quote, right? For leaders to be able to name the reality and to bring the hope, right? To walk those two together.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the realities to name is just higher ed is in this place. And there's
Mhm.
a handful of institutions that are fine. And of the accredited, post-secondary degree granting institutions, vast majority are in some form of distress,
Mhm.
some form of challenge. So when we enter that shared that shared challenge together, the advice I'd offer is first name the realities, and then second, kind of walk alongside, be in the moment, build your
Mhm.
communities. I think there is a lot of reasons for hope for higher ed, but we also have to sort of know the moments that we're in, and
Mhm.
step into them accordingly.
Yeah.
The college closure one in particular, though, I think what you're describing, especially among the degree granting four-year institutions, it's it's just so unlike a lot of the grief and a lot of the challenge out there, because the same things that brought us into higher ed, it's more than just a job, right? And it's more than just
Mhm.
an organization. It's
Yeah.
what makes closures so acutely and comprehensively painful.
Mhm.
And I remember someone I worked with just saying, man, this feels so layered. Like, the
Mm.
grief is layered, and that stuck with me because it's not just one job or one job description changing or a program ending. It's everywhere you go. That artifact from the 80s that was
Yeah.
sacred for our organization is going to get sold on eBay, or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah.
The special spot where the two alum used to date, and they were like, that was their like meetup spot, like
Mhm.
that is going to be gone. And so the layering of grief is just so profound in a space
Yeah.
like that. Um, but yeah, I'll pause there because there's more. There's, I'm sure, a lot more we could talk about around navigating the grief.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. And it's also because it's a group process as well, that
Yeah.
I know, sometimes if your position's eliminated, you may be sort of navigating this solo in a way, but with a college closing, that you've got a whole community that's grieving, and you're looking to
Yeah.
each other for support at the same
Yep.
time that
Yep.
you need support. And yeah, so
Yep.
it's a lot. And
Yeah.
I just appreciate you sharing your reflections on it, because I know it's just timely for many people. And sadly, I don't see that changing in the near future. And
No.
we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's personal, it's professional, and it's organizational, right?
Yeah.
So the personal is that identity piece I was talking about. It's the nature, that the erratic, unpredictable nature of grief. I think the professional is all these vocational questions, right? Am I still relevant? Will I get a job? Is it going to be meaningful? Especially when you layer the two together, you're asking questions about family and roots, and even changing health insurance, which I've done five times in 7 years now. And you're like, I got to find a new doctor provider. I have to fill out the new intake forms, right? All of those are forms of transition and grief and loss. And then you fold in the organizational dimension, right? What does it mean for this place to change without me, or this place to end, right? To come to a conclusion. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, for anyone out there dealing with that, obviously they're not alone. Not that that makes it better, but I think, I don't know. I guess I'm going to leave it at that. There's just so much there that, and I haven't been in that position, fortunately, but it just, there's stuff that almost feels like hard to articulate or vocalize about it. I think because of just the feelings and the sense of being around that, or about anything, we commit. And again, whether it's through a closing or just other reasons, I think with student affairs in particular, we commit so much to our work where it isn't necessarily a 9-to-5 job. And so there's that, you had referenced a piece of your identity, that it's like, who am I? And well, who am I comes with this other place where I live many hours a week. And we immerse ourselves in that experience. So so it's a lot to hold and a lot to, I guess, unpack as in thinking about it.
Well, and you mentioned the community, Melinda, and I think that has actually been probably more essential than I ever gave it credit for, going through each of these chapters. I remember my first one, we lived in a place that was near kind of a rail to trail. And so, my wife would get home from her job, and I would say, hey, I'm going to go for a walk and just sort of think through some things, do some reflective work. And I would go hit the, and the downside to those rails to trails is if you walk 7 miles out, you also have to walk 7 miles back, right? And especially if you get caught in a thunderstorm or something. So I remember going for those, and I would call people, right? And sometimes they were just sounding boards. Like, can I just process some things I'm thinking about? I'm trying to figure out this job posting and if it would make sense for me. I'm wondering if there's a decision I need to make around which direction my focus and application should go. But other times it was the therapy of community, of support, of people helping me tune into who I am, and who I really am in a moment that feels really disordered and chaotic. And some of my calls, I remember just being like, can you just help me see myself? Because here I am trying to put together a cover letter, and yet in the pervasiveness of grief, I'm not even sure I'm in tune with what my passions and strengths are. Can you just help me reflect and bring naming and voice to that? And then there were the people who would send little notes or texts, check in. One friend is a director of career development from grad school. She became a director of career development at a pretty prestigious university, and she said, "Hey, I'd like to help you with your resumes, with your cover letters. Just send them my way and I'll help you." And this is pre-chat GPT, right? But it was also just someone who knows you, right? And she was so generous to help me through that. It's the community that gets us through these things. The same community that we've loved working alongside, networking at conferences. They're the ones that want to pull for us in these raw, lonely moments.
Yeah, which is awesome. And I think the idea of knowing that there are people out there who, just on a given day, you may get a text from them saying, hey, I was just thinking about you. I'm wondering how you're doing, or a call. I remember I got a call a month or two ago from someone, and I was like, oh, why is she calling me? Is everything okay, or whatever? And she was just calling to check in, but I didn't think that could be the reason she was calling. I thought, there was something else. And so I just appreciate the supports we have around us who are looking out for us. And there are days where that means so much. It means so much every
Mhm.
day, but there are days that it's hard. And so
Yeah.
having that army of support is really wonderful.
Yeah. And support can be the professional, like we talked about.
Mhm.
I think it's also surprising in these moments the ways that our personal networks our kinship, our family, our
Yeah.
friendship groups, our faith communities, they become ways of almost reminding us who we are, that we're complete people outside of that deeply meaningful, absolutely
Yeah.
energizing, sometimes chaotic work, but the
Mhm.
work that we've been
Right.
doing. And I think that's important too. And again, this is all like the same advice we would tell our students, right? Get your
Exactly.
sleep, drink your water, talk to
Yep.
good people, get mentored, have good friendships, be healthy.
Yep.
It's the
Yeah.
same advice, just turning it inwardly.
Right, exactly. We gotta
Yeah.
practice what we preach to everyone all
Right.
the time.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it really brings it home, and I found that I have been more mindful about how I'm spending my unstructured time
Yeah.
because that routine is gone, and so we make choices every day about
Mhm.
how we're going to face that day, and
Mhm.
hopefully it involves some self-care and some
Mhm.
support from others.
Yeah.
So so
And a
you
little structure. Yeah. Like
and a
sometimes
little
it's good
structure.
to
Structure
have a
helps with
calendar and you're like, okay, I
yeah.
need to go apply to jobs, or I need to go, work on this project. It helps us get out of those moments because grief is also erratic, right? It's
Yeah.
unpredictable. And the number of times that I found myself, having to acknowledge, it's almost like these moments have helped me be a better student of grief
Mhm.
and understand the way that it it manifests in me and the ways that it shapes my thinking and my self narratives,
Mm.
and then to learn how to walk alongside it, recognizing that it can be helpful in my journey, even as painful as it might be. But as I get to know it and befriend it and walk alongside it and help it not overrun my life but be a part of this chapter, it also helps me better understand when I need to have a structured and accountability. And I remember my first one, the first job during COVID. I had someone who was checking in. I had a quota. I had to meet of applications of cover letters. And even when there was nothing interesting that was out there, I'm like, I'm still going to apply because they're going to call me. And that's part of that team that I
Mhm.
assembled and said, I'm going to need help because
Yeah.
this is too difficult, I think, for me just to sort of muscle my way through it.
Mhm.
And someone's like, dude, I'm going to keep you on track. So he had
Oh,
what was it, Trello? I had a Trello board, and he had shared access so he could see how
nice.
every application was moving forward. And I've completed these and I've attached this. And he was my like project manager.
That's awesome. You have an accountability partner right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what I'm hearing a couple of things. Well, first of all, before I say that, I do appreciate you using the word grief because I think a lot of people think, oh, it's your job, but so much of our identities are wrapped up in our job and it's a loss. I mean, it's funny that
Mhm.
we use the phrase you lost your job, that there's
Mhm.
loss, that you use the phrase lose or loss or whatever
Yeah.
and associate that with grief, that there is grief involved in it, whether or not we think about it in those terms. And so I appreciate you using that term.
Yeah.
And as you coped with the loss of your job, I've heard you talking about self care and the walking and building a team and support, and also just the idea of, again, reflecting on sort of the meaning and the purpose of the work you've done. Um, any other strategies or suggestions you would provide to anyone listening to this and saying, "Oh, I just feel like I need some tips right now,"
Mhm.
especially someone new
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. Well, yes, I have a couple thoughts. As I'm shaping those thoughts, I'm also just being mindful. Like we've not really talked about how this affects, your personal family or dependents
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
or your sense of connection to a space, right? Like
Hmm.
again, we teach our students to cherish space and to
Yeah.
be thoughtful in that. And then here we are, in higher ed, all too often moving around and disrupting our own sense of stability and space. So there's a lot there, and especially if it's fresh for somebody, there's these waves of almost like unlayering, unpacking new dimensions of transition or a loss like this. And it's the, oh my goodness, like what do I do for health insurance? Or, oh my goodness, what do I do
Mhm.
for,
Yeah.
my, do I have to get a new primary provider? Do I have
Mhm.
to move? What's the housing market like? I mean, there's all these layers, the people who are depending on me for income and all that. So it's all very real.
Yeah.
A couple pieces of advice, and I can talk more about the practical, and if anyone wants to connect, I'd be happy to help with some of the practical, like nuts and bolts.
Mhm.
But one of the most helpful things for me was really more of a perspective shift, and I'll give kind of two examples of that perspective shift. But it was shifting this from some sort of cursed moment in my story, a moment of shame, a moment to hide and to be buried, to recognizing this is going to be an unexpected gift. Um, this is going to be a hard moment, but not a moment without value. And
Mhm.
and one of the ways that someone two notes on this. One was a friend of mine just reminded me. She kept saying, "Don't forget, there's gonna come another chapter in your story. This is not the end of your story. That other chapter might be here in a couple of months, might be a
Mhm.
year, might be more than a year. But on the other side of that chapter, of this chapter, you're gonna look back and you'll have seen kind of what you did with the chapter that you were in. You're going to see yourself and you're going to want to almost call out to yourself and say, hey, hang in there. It's coming, right? The good
Mhm.
thing on the other side isn't too far away. And that notion was so helpful for me. The other
Mhm.
perspective shift, you know, if you're like a dentist's office and you have like a magazine, it's glossy and it's looking good,
Mhm.
and you're flipping through it. There's often that like tear out card stock. It's like a
Mhm.
form or something, right? Um, and and it sort of becomes intrusive when you're trying to flip through a magazine. You can't really fold the pages right. You can't comfortably move that magazine around. You know what I'm talking about, right,
Mhm.
Melinda?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. It it
Okay,
it
yeah,
is. It's
it's
like, what's up
frustrating.
with this piece of paper
Yeah,
in here? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I remember when I first started, my first reluctant free agency. I I thought of it as that, the
Mm.
unwanted, intrusive, annoying,
Mm.
pesky, not even beautiful. It was just this black form that should be torn out and discarded. And it took me, honestly, probably 3 months of working with grief, of working, sounding board with friends, getting insights, perspectives, reading, all those sleeping, all those things. But it took me some time and I began to recognize this is not as much like that as it is those unchanged metaphors, sorry, those books where there's a chapter and the
Mhm.
chapter doesn't flow like the other chapters. Maybe it's like a flashback to 10 years ago, or maybe it's a different, area, a different set of characters. But suddenly that chapter that feels different, it's actually deepening and expanding the plot. It's moving the story
Mm.
along just in a really unexpected way.
Mhm.
Because when you finish chapter 4, you weren't expecting chapter 5 to look and feel in this different way. And when I could do that perspective shift, I began to say, okay, this could be a gift if I can just use it well. I
Mhm.
wasn't a saint and I wasn't always emotionally mature and I pouted and I still had all those very human feelings
Yeah.
and experiences. But I started thinking, okay, what do I need to read? What are the 10 best
Mm.
books? Let me build my network. I want to get to know who are the best vice presidents of student affairs in my network, and I want to hear from them who they think are the best. And I want to keep interviewing and getting to know and learning about the field. And I want to follow new voices and expand my own journey. And then in time, again, I could look back and I could
Yeah.
say, wow, I entered my next job more centered, more
Mm.
joyful, more motivated to do the work that I was best equipped to
Mm.
do. I was a healthier leader. I was a healthier follower. And that wouldn't have been the case if I had, within 3 weeks, jumped right in. It ended up being 8 months. I didn't love that, but it gave me that space to see what the chapter could be. So if I could offer encouragement at that perspective level, I would just say, there's an opportunity, I think, in these unwanted transitions, unexpected
Mhm.
transitions. And if we can use it well, maybe there's good that can come out of it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that analogy of like a chapter, because this is a chapter in our lives. It's not our whole life. We've had a lot before now,
Mhm.
and we will hopefully have many years from now. And so this is just a piece of our story. And you're right. If we think of ourselves as the author, the whole self-authorship, that what are we going to write as we move through this chapter? And
Yeah.
so I guess I appreciate the fact that it's just one piece of a larger puzzle. And as we're talking, the idea is I think about it in terms of self-authorship, which I think is empowering, that we don't have to not have a say or not have impact in what the next chapter is.
Mm, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I think when you were talking about the nitty gritty, which we won't get into today, but like the idea of thinking about, oh, what do I do with health insurance or whatever? You had said,
Yeah.
oh, if
Yeah.
people want more information, they could reach out to you. So in general, if people are hearing you today and being like, oh,
Yeah.
something that Ian said really resonated with me, I want to connect. Are you open for people reaching out to you?
100%. Yeah. Especially if you're navigating college closure or job loss and you want an empathetic ear, I'm here for it. and frankly, it meant so much to me when I've been going through these chapters to see others step forward in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned over the years that's part of the gift of this work, of this community. Student affairs, especially, it's full of some wonderfully emotionally intelligent, thoughtful, centered, insightful people, and it becomes part of that supportive community. Higher ed is a great place still to be, and
Mm-hmm.
so if I can be of help, my LinkedIn, I'm pretty active in. We've talked about that. My email is also listed there on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you and see how I can support you with the nitty gritty or with just reminders about those perspective pieces.
Thank you. And I want to mention that I had started a group on LinkedIn, which you're a part of,
Yeah.
a week or two ago, because I was so tired of like these scammers or bots being like, oh, you're looking for a job. It's amazing how many jobs people had for me without ever meeting me. So I started this closed group I think it's called the Reluctant Free Agent, like
Mhm.
a group for unemployed people. But,
Yeah.
it's closed because I'm doing my best to screen as people say they want to be in the group to make sure I don't get those bots or those scammers.
Yeah.
And so if anyone's watching this and they're like, oh, I'd love to connect with Ian or Melinda or, these other people in the group who are wonderful, the group is open to people in this situation. You just have to
Yeah.
request to join. And then I will look at your profile and make sure that, you're a real person and not a bot. And I will approve you to join. So if you feel like you'd like to just connect with other people and get tips or whatnot, we've had some, discussions about AI in there or whatnot. There's lots of stuff that we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
So that's another way to connect with Ian or me or other people you haven't even met yet.
Mhm.
So Ian, what are you hoping for your next move?
Yeah. Thank you. The next chapter, because it's going to come and
What is the next chapter?
it's going to be good. Yeah. So I
It's so great.
it's going to be great. I know I'm a campus person. I'm one of those. I'm a campus guy. I want to be in the space and the place, and I want to help. I want to build those relationships with students, with coworkers. I want to feel the mission and feel the strategic plan, not just read about it. So I'm looking for opportunities, especially in the current region that we're at. Although we're open to seeing other regions. But I also acknowledge, hey, it's mid-June, right? And chief student affairs officers, deans of student postings, if they're being posted in mid-June, that August is going to be a little wild. So I'm starting to think about ways I might be able to help in interim capacities. And frankly, over the last few years, I've been thinking about ways to support higher education through some of the business challenges, but with a student affairs perspective. Sometimes that's not always attended to in the financial analysis, the revenue expense, management picture. So I've been kicking off some small projects with other institutions to try to help in project-based work and some consulting capacities. And that's also been rewarding, right? It's a chance to come alongside teams, support them in the great work they're doing. And even in my unexpected sabbatical, my unexpected time of unemployment, I think there's opportunities that I can still be helpful to higher ed.
Well, I think there are opportunities because there's a lot out there, and you've obviously been a great help to higher ed to date from what I've seen. So I look forward to hearing about this next chapter or whatever it is. But you're right, there are lots of opportunities out
Yeah.
there. And even though it feels tough because there are a lot of struggles, there are a lot of higher education institutions that are going to be around for many years. And
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see where each of us lands. But I
Yes.
appreciate, and it's interesting because, this is as we wrap up, this is a time where we mention grief and we mention struggle and all of that. But
Mhm.
also, there's still this idea and listening to you about purpose and your passion for higher ed. There's still, obviously a lot there that has promise and that is good. And so I appreciate that we're not losing sight of that, even though there are things that
Mhm.
are hard. And
Mhm.
so that's important to remember too, that it's
Yeah.
hard, but this is one piece of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And this moment, whether someone discerns in this moment that higher ed is still their anchor and they want to move
Mhm.
back in and want to find a space, or they find that there's a piece of the work they've been doing that has just been so life-giving and they can do that piece um, outside of higher ed, but they can
Mhm.
do it in meaningful, fulfilling ways. This moment that we're in can be such an insightful, formative. It's an important moment, and I don't want to
Yeah.
lose sight of that moment. And so, yeah, let's continue to cheer for each other, Melinda.
Yes.
Let's continue to cheer for others out there, to
Yep.
support, to advocate, to help each other with opportunities and postings and tips and advice and encouragement, right? Because that's
Yeah.
critical too. Yeah,
Yeah.
there will be another chapter, and it's going to be a good one.
It is. It is. So, Ian, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Just hearing your thoughts about all of this and the pearls of wisdom that you shared today. So, thank you very much. It's been great having this conversation, and I will see you soon. In various ways. Maybe not like this, but I'll
Yeah.
see you online.
Thanks, Melinda. Thanks for the invite, and we'll connect soon. Take care, friend.
Great. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.